All right, ready to go?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the FPL Script. Today's video is going to be Season 2, Episode 19, otherwise the GW16 preview. It's not really a video, of course. I realized that we're actually recording live. I'm still about to adjust my webcam here, but obviously we're looking here at an episode where there has been a very short turnaround, and the biggest key piece of news is that we still don't know what exactly is going on with Son, which obviously leads more midfield doubt on top of more than likely for most of our community an Mbuma replacement need. And the landscape is pretty poor because I think just thinking about fixtures this week, unfortunately, a lot of the midfielders have poor games, or of course, they're dealing with some sort of uncertainties in the future. But more about Gameweek 16 later. In terms of my week, I'm obviously FPL __ Fran. Make YouTube videos from time to time. I had a decent week finally. 41 points. That sends me back to sort of top 31k in the world. Feels weird because obviously I had a very, very sort of blisteringly good start in Game Week 2, and I'm still technically not even at the peak rank that I've reached this season, but it's been slow and steady, sort of getting back there. And I do feel like I have absolutely lost out versus the sort of Salah owners, or in terms of, no Hollanders, or even, for example, some people who didn't wildcard at all and just simply went on to, Salah structure. But how do you feel about your season so far, Schadenfreudist?
Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm your other co-host JD, also known as at the Richard Freudist on X. So I had, I think, probably one of the worst game weeks. Again, not comparable to the 20-ish point game week that we had. I don't know if you want to change the graphic to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So nothing. I mean, other than Maguire, nothing else to write home about. So I didn't have Porro or Trent or any of the players basically who scored who were low owned. I think Darwin should also count as one of those players because 3 points this week did matter, I think, in terms of the overall points. So yeah, I guess the not getting Mbumo on wildcard 10 finally came home to roost this week because I had to spend a transfer to get him in rather than get Eze out. Then that free transfer could have been used to get Palmer in last week. And now this week, obviously, Mbuma is injured again. So I have to spend another free transfer now to get him out, which is not optimal at all. But I guess that's what happens when you make suboptimal decisions in the first place. Although I think the punishment, sorry, has been a little bit harsh, but I'll take whatever points I can get.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose at the end of the day, the way I see it, worst case is we're probably all thinking about maybe taking Boom out on Game Week 18. So that being fast forwarded maybe 2 weeks isn't entirely bad. We probably would have to have made that move
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah, fair, fair.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's not too bad. But the sort of new sort of visual that we are debuting for the show, which obviously is in a draft stage right now, is effectively just looking at um, players or assets rather, looking at how they're valued between just pure review MD and market odds. So just looking at, for example, the expected value comparison. The data here obviously is within a specific horizon, this being 16 to 27. And one thing that we haven't been able to fit onto the screen is just the prefacing point that for any of these players here, we've adjusted their minutes to be at least above 60, right? So at least reaching certain thresholds where, of course, as a defender, you'd get your clean sheet, etc., etc. So that's the key thing here. The sort of top chart is basically your review favored picks, which means obviously review has better expected value sort of expectations for such players, and then obviously the bottom one is your market odds favored picks. Do you want to maybe just go through some of the review ones? I think not entirely unexpected that we see, for example, Pedro all the way at the top here.
Yeah, so I probably will put out a post later on explaining maybe
Mm,
even more details
yeah, I
about
think
this
that's
because
helpful.
I have seen a couple of questions like asking basic questions as to like what is review is probably a very basic question, but other than that, like what do the percentages mean?
Right.
So in a nutshell, they mean that these are the players for whom, let's say, market odds versus review have the greatest disparity. And what we're trying to do is because Fran and I noticed that we talk about this almost on every single podcast that we do, which is how, let's say, review rates Bowen, Mitoma, Adingra, etc., compared to market odds or other models. So this again, as we actually spoke about last week in last week's podcast, this is a derivative study, assuming that review is the best model out there, which it is. We look at, let's say, market odds versus review to see if we feel like a review is slow to adjust on some of these, or if market odds is too fast to adjust. And most of the times we know that market odds is a little quick to adjust to some of these things, but it is interesting nonetheless to look at this. And it also serves as, I guess, a USP for the podcast as well. And we've been trying to get that out as well. So if we look at, let's say, review MT favored ones, it means that, for example, Joao Pedro has the highest disparity between market odds and review, where review is rating him much higher than market odds. So 12.3% doesn't seem like a lot, but over, let's say, 12 weeks and the EV that you gain, it will add up, I think. So for someone like Joao Pedro, I guess the players we see or the managers we see own Joao Pedro also make it clear that those that play with review 100% or give weightage to only reviews market massive data model are the ones who still own Joao Pedro. That is pretty clear, I think. And Gross, I think, is the quintessential review pick that odds generally does not favor as much because he doesn't seem to be, let's say, in the limelight as much. But we've seen over the past few weeks as well. For example, on Gameweek 10 wildcard, I was being told to get Gross, but I went with Adingra and I got one goal out of Adingra. That's it. Whereas I think Gross has gone on to get like 3 to 4 assists, I think, and a couple of goals in the same period. And
Yeah.
being benched in 1 week, he got benched last week. So despite the benching, he's managed to outscore Adingra by quite some margin. Gibbs White, again, as we've spoken, people who heavily rely on review 100% MD are always the ones who go for Gibbs White. Although looks like his minutes are now extremely volatile, which is not the greatest thing for owners. Bruno Fernandes is actually a little bit of a surprise for me because uh, historically he has been backed by odds, because I have also done data modeling for fan team last season, and also I kind of keep tabs on some of these players because they are also relevant in Champions League fantasy. So Fernandes being here is a little bit of a surprise. I guess it's because markets must have quickly adjusted to the fact that United's underlyings are pretty bad this season compared to what they were expected to get. I think if you look at Rob T, I forgot what his Twitter handle is, but maybe we can link it later in the
Yeah, Rob T
video.
FPL is just that.
Yeah, Rob
Yeah.
T FPL, exactly. So he tracks like disparity in expected points, I think, from when the season started to now. And I think United have fallen probably the most from when they were expected to, from what they were expected to finish at the start of the season to now. So I guess it's just a part of that Bruno is now less favored by market odds. Other than that, I mean, Soboslai never really consideration, especially with Trent back now on the menu firmly, and Alisson also being back, and Salah always being Salah. Maybe when he leaves for AFCON, he could be part of the conversation, because who takes penalties is a big question. If Darwin is not on the pitch, I'm assuming Darwin will be much more on the pitch than he has been now. But if, let's say, Darwin is not going to take them, then who is the next contender for them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think review actually has already pre-assigned 30, 30, 30 between Szoboszlai, McAllister, and Darwin. So that's probably why Szoboszlai filters through here
Interesting.
during the
Interesting.
AFCON period. So that's probably the case. But it's interesting that the disparity sort of on Brighton for both sides, I'd say, as well, because when you look at some of
Yes.
the market odds picks, you see someone like Buonanotte there, but we have also, for example, seen Adingra within the extended list in terms of market odds favored picks. So even maybe from a tactical point of view, I guess you can argue review is looking, for example, at maybe some of the center forward picks. At the same time, though, I remember markets odd favors also has Evan Ferguson there. So actually, there's just a general disparity between the evaluation of specific Brighton picks across both. So that's interesting. And then in terms of other market odds picks as well, I think Martinelli is someone that I've always seen very, very favored by market odds.
Mm.
I remember at times when I'd be running market like Martinelli at some pretty subpar minutes that he would actually have higher EV than Saka, which is outrageous to me. But um, it's that's an interesting one. Always feels like an outlier in my opinion. But we talked about this before the pod had started as well, and players like Wisa and definitely Sterling, for example, are
Gordon, I think.
exact
We
and
signed
Yeah,
Gordon.
Gordon. Yeah, we
Yeah,
sent Gordon
yeah.
obviously players this season who have had a huge uptick in terms of the underlyings, and that's no surprise for Wisa because we now see, for example, Brentford are still top six in terms of expected goals, and that's not, for example, just front loaded to Mbumo. Like players like Mopay and Wisa have benefited quite a bit in terms of having good XG, and then in terms of Gordon, last season he actually had running pretty good XG. But I think it's also a case where when you see him, for example, moving to a better team, a better attack, and he's now able to actually back that up over probably around 1,000 minutes so far,
Mm.
that maybe it's okay for market to be favoring, for example, someone like Gordon. But it might also take some time for review to adjust, which is also perfectly fine in instances like this. With Sterling, that's an interesting one too, because I think we can't necessarily say that it's about sort of a player who's sort of young or is entering into a better situation, other than maybe, let's say, obviously moving on from last season, which was an absolute calamity. But you're sort of looking at a player like Sterling, who historically, for example, with City was an was a brilliant asset, and then obviously recently with Chelsea has been completely dull. I think yeah, those are the sorts of picks that are probably the most interesting here. Some of your other picks in terms of Bellegarde, Jones, Bruno Guimaraes, Jensen are altogether not interesting to me whatsoever, just because, I mean, even probably on market, you'd never see them actually being, picked out as an option on your solves and things like that. Do you have any sort of other comments? Maybe any other trends that you might have noticed?
Yeah, I think one thing we also talked about is Adingra,
Mm,
and a case like Adingra's is perfect to understand week on week when we start tracking this week on week, because I think 1 week's data is not enough.
yeah.
Once we start tracking this data week on week and we see the percentages ebb and flow for these players, we can actually see what. I'm not saying that we'll completely understand the workings of market odds or review, but it gives us a much better sense, I think, of how market odds function compared to massive data. Because Adingra not being on here, so for context, Adingra is 20th on this list, and he's at something like minus 11%. He was one of the biggest disparities when I wildcarded in Game Week 10. So
Hmm.
the fact that he has gone down by a significant amount seems to me that market odds have adjusted back to the fact that he is perhaps not as prolific as they thought he would be.
Yeah.
Because the other way makes less sense, because I don't think his underlyings have been that good to warrant, let's say, review increasing his MD. I think it's the other way around, where market odds have started to adjust to him not being that great of an asset in FPL. And the other point that we discussed offline is we are going to tweak this to make sure that we have, let's say, selected options moving forward, because we don't want to talk about, as Fran pointed out, Bellegarde, Jones, and Bruno Guimaraes. They are irrelevant as far as the FPL is concerned. So I would rather talk about the 10 players who are rated differently by review and odds that are of relevance in FPL. So, as Fran already talked about, I think Evan Ferguson was one of them. I'm just going to mention a couple of names so people know some more players that are rated better by market odds compared to review. So we had Dokore, who was 11th on the list. We had Jeremy Doku, who is 14th on the list. We have Ferguson, who is 15th on the list. So I guess these are some of the more interesting names. And moving forward, if we can track them week on week, and we plan to, we can talk about the change in trends from both sides.
Yeah, and actually, one pick that we do often discuss about within our circles is someone like Bowen, where he clearly is actually very well rated on other models, as opposed to
Mm.
market. So it's interesting that, for example, with someone like Bowen, there's not so much of a disparity actually between how review rates him and how the market rates him. Whereas when we look at, for example, TalkFam's model, or even I've had a look at Hub's model, Bowen is very, very, very well
Mm.
rated, right?
Mm.
Um, Whereas, for example, even when, in my opinion, when you look at review, it does almost sort of value him as a little bit of an ineffectual pick. But that's an interesting thing to follow as well. Maybe we might expand the scope of this at one point, and it'll be worth sort of looking into. But I think that's just interesting. Obviously, your feedback is much appreciated because this is going to be something new for us to continue tweaking and honing upon. And hopefully we'll be able to share the visuals, on a weekly basis, and it will be something of use, right, for the community. Because we usually go into a season with the understanding that our expectations will change, and being able to actually visualize that too as it's actually gradually happening is nice. Beyond just, for example, let's say if I don't know, let's say suddenly the X-Mins for a player has suddenly changed. Obviously, we know expected value will change there, but it's nice to see, obviously, the actual differences between maybe how models are interpreting certain groups of players and so on and so forth. But the next sort of topic that we have is on defenders, and the title of the podcast is actually Trent again. Now, Trent isn't on this graphic, but he obviously is probably the talk of the town as of late. However, I will still, once again postulate that I do think Trent is always one of those picks where he only exists on a 1 structure, because unless, let's say, you don't have Son, for example, in 2 structure, I'm finding it hard to believe that Trent would actually be within your team. That or you are, the IMF. So that's the situation right now. I think Pedro, Porro, and James are probably the 2 picks where I think on any generic team structure, they are being considered as your sort of good transfers in, no matter what. And I thought it would be interesting to just talk about those 2 picks and where you sit on them at this moment in time.
If I were to answer in one word, it would be Porro. And I think because of the X-Men's disparity, James clearly not being fit enough to play against United. Maybe situation will change and he'll play the next game. But again, there's a fixture congestion for Chelsea. And I've been speculating from last week that they will take Carabao Cup more seriously than Newcastle.
Yeah.
Because Newcastle simply can't take it seriously. They don't have enough manpower to take it seriously. But Chelsea definitely will, because I think that is their one legitimate chance of getting some sort of silverware at the end of the season, similar to what Ten Hag essentially targeted last season. So if that is the case, then James should play that game if he is part of their best 11, and that should mean that he would miss out one of Sheffield United and Wolves, and those are the fixtures for him for which you need him, right? That's why you're going to buy him. And if that's the case, and also his propensity to be subbed, just like Cash, could start off well. Like, for example, you could get one clean sheet where he gets subbed off after 60 and then they concede. But the next game could easily be the case where he is brought on from the bench or he is subbed off even before 60 minutes. So, for a player who is as volatile in terms of X minutes as James, I don't want to go there. And for Porro, my feelings could not be any different because I've been talking about it for weeks now. He's the one player that I look at fans team and I think I need to own this guy. But somehow there are so many fires to put out in my team that it's going to be very difficult to get onto him. But for, let's say, the medium to long term, he is probably one of the best defender picks. Given the fact that clean sheets have been so hard to come by this season, I saw a statistic from Opta saying that this is the most goals per game that have been scored in Premier League history since 1992-93. It's something like 3+ goals have been scored per game or something. It's something crazy. I can link it in the chat or in the comments later on for people to check it out. But there is a huge disparity from the past few seasons to this season. And if clean sheets are going to be harder to come by, then I guess I want to look at players or defenders with attacking returns potential. And Porro is definitely one of the best. With corners, maybe some set pieces where they're probably taking free kicks, indirect free kicks from, let's say, the fringes of the box. He's one of the best, I think, in that sense. I mean, I'm sure you're a fan because you own him, but what are your thoughts on, let's say, Colwill, someone like Colwill, because you also own him?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy I own both of those picks. I'm still a little bit cautious with Colwell at times, just because I think, Chelsea have a lot of games. There might be instances where maybe even Colwell could lose out. But obviously, as a younger player, someone who doesn't actually have, extensive injury issues, I'm hoping that he will be able to sort of manage this run fine. I think Cucurella obviously is, a very useful squad rotation player, and you'll see that because, of course, Poch has the sort of confidence in playing him right back, although I recognize as well Gusto is back in training, so that probably takes away, additional minutes from Cucurella, but also maybe adds a little bit more doubt to Colwell's minutes. Ultimately, though, I completely agree with you when it comes to James. I think it might be interesting to see, obviously, what happens with the Everton game and see how many minutes he gets. But
Mm.
the Pochettino comments are probably the scariest thing. Just sort of reading his comments about James and why he, for example, needed to start off the bench and how they're sort of approaching his, inability to stay fit and how they need to sort of look at him as a work in progress. I just think over this run of games, there's no way you're going to get exactly what you want out of James, right? And we're looking at him, for example, in review, assuming he starts 60, 70 games. And this is sort of when we were talking about someone like Zinchenko, who's not injury prone at all, but was actually, sometimes rotation prone just because he is sometimes privy to an early sub at times, or maybe obviously starting off the bench. But, even with him, it feels like I'd be a bit more confident giving him, let's say, 60, 70 minutes a game. Whereas with James, I completely agree with you. Just because of fixture congestion doesn't feel like a real plausible sort of way to think about James as a pick. Whereas with Porro, I don't think, I can't speak highly enough of him. 90 minutes per game on set pieces, which was actually a huge gift with the Madison injury as well. That's not something we would have expected wild
Yeah,
carding on
yeah,
8. So he's
yeah.
only really improved as a pick. And then in the meantime, obviously, even though whilst our expectations of Spurs as a defense has gotten worse, the reality is he's sort of separated himself even further from Udogi, which is incredible. And obviously right now too, given that Spurs are actually one of the few teams with, middling to good fixtures, I think Porro is probably still the pick that I would go with this week, even to just get a little bit of immediate short-term value, because you're seeing players like Gabriel, Colwill. I mean, their EV at best really is something like 3.0. So,
Mm.
yeah. And even with James, for example, I think once again, because he's so volatile, I'd probably just wait for as much maximum use as possible and bring him in for Sheffield and actually get that EV, hopefully, if you think you can actually claim that then, as opposed to jumping onto him in a pretty tough Everton away fixture and then hoping for the best once again, not knowing exactly what's going to happen with James when he plays, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes or maybe 60 minutes of football. So,
Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to ask you was, I think as a Colville owner, you must be glad that the situation is what it is, because no one really should be buying Colville based on the information we have, I guess. I mean, people will still buy him, but there's still some uncertainty, I guess, when it comes to his minutes.
yeah,
But if you look at like the situation with people who own him, I think you're good, right? You don't need to worry about that at all.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you there. So I think I'm in a nice spot where I don't have to force the Colwell transfer. But some people will actually be doing that transfer anyways, because I can see a lot of teams where people are still looking for that third defender, or that
Mm.
fourth defender, for example, to carry them through this run of games. And yeah, I wouldn't have the confidence right now to go into Colwell. I think some people are a little bit more confident than myself, and that's totally fine. Maybe I'm just also a little bit wary that I've been watching some Chelsea games lately, and it's been hard to ignore. But they have been playing some tough opponents. Like that's a
Yeah.
reality too. But
Yeah,
the way
fair.
I see it is, for example, Chelsea continue to look like a very good offensive unit, whereas actually their defense probably isn't exactly where I thought it would be. I think it's more sort of towards the mid-table, and that's totally fine as well, because ultimately, if they have 6 to 8 great games, then you're totally happy owning a mid-table defense at times, right? So, yeah, it's a
Oh,
bit of a
sorry.
double-edged sword.
One more anecdotal point about James is, I think the penalty dream is now firmly dead, because
True.
whatever
Yeah.
dreams we had in game week 1 of him possibly being on penalties, there's no chance now,
Yeah, I
because
mean, I don't
we
have
have.
any dreams or illusions of that. I
Yeah.
mean, I
No, yeah, I honestly did, because that's the only reason I had him in game week 1, but he got injured, so
yeah.
we can move on probably.
Actually, one question in terms of James. So, for example, let's say some people are about to head into triple Chelsea, and I imagine Colwell and Palmer might be, your default 2 out of 3. Like, do you have thoughts on, for example, do you think Sterling sort of blocking Nkunku in the future is a problem, or would you just go Sterling right now? since Sterling I think is a very interesting sort of pick.
So I talked about this in a Wildcard 10 group chat that the best way for you to assess if you want to get Sterling is to do it stochastically. And the way you do it is you have to run simulations. So you have to run sensitivity analysis, considering that Sterling is banned in every single game up all the way up till game week 20.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do that, that will give you, and then of course you have to aggregate the picks that the sensitivity analysis gives you, and from that you can understand what your best way forward is. I understand it's a lot of computational power, it's a lot of time spent, I guess, as well, because you have to keep monitoring the browser. I guess the review sometimes breaks down if you let's say click away from the browser and you're doing something else. Sometimes it gets stuck. There are a lot of technical issues with that process. So it will take, it's resource intensive, but I think it's a valid exercise because one, for example, Foden is going to miss one game for sure because he's a part of the graphic. So I'm kind of merging into that point as well. So your alternatives, let's say, are Foden. Foden is definitely going to miss one game. So it's the uncertainty of missing that game. And I am not a fan of putting Mins down, let's say, as like 60-60, or let's say whatever, like 70-70 to sorry, 75-72, 69-66, something like that. Because that is not a fair representation. Once he gets his one ban out of the way, he's going to play, let's say, 70 to 80 minutes, or sorry, 80 to 90 minutes for the rest of the games. Now, one game that is an anomaly is the Brighton game where Chelsea got a red card, but Sterling got subbed on minute 66 for Palmer.
Yeah.
Now, those are very specific circumstances, so I don't want to put much weightage into that. But also something that I thought is a little different, like out of the ordinary. I'm sure Chelsea fans will tell me there's nothing to worry about, and Sterling is still going to play, let's say, 80 to 90 minutes. But I would only go with, let's say, the yellow card suspension thing, and same with Wang as well. I
Yeah.
would do the same with Wang because Wang is also on 4 yellow cards, as we know. So I would do the same sensitivity analysis with him as well. I guess you only need to do it once to understand what the situation is for both of them, because you can. Oh, wait, that's actually crazy. If you wanted to get either of them, the combinations are actually, wow, there are too many, I think, because you'll have to put in, let's say, Wang next week, and then Sterling. You'll have to go like Wang for 1 week, and then Sterling for all of the weeks, and then Wang for the next week, and then Sterling for all of the weeks. So it's going to be a crazy exercise. I would not recommend that. I think you need to decide on who you want to go for out of those two, and then probably plan around the rest of the players, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, that sounds pretty chaotic in general. Like
Yeah,
if
it is.
you're
It
about
is.
to
It
jump
is. It
into
is
two players
too
with four
too.
yellow cards, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It is too
Um,
time resource intensive, I think.
but generally, I think what you're advocating for example, is like maybe just even if you let's say we're going to invest into Sterling, um, get his X minutes right the first time round, and then run sort of multiple drafts where Sterling suddenly blanks, every single fixture
Mm,
on every single draft, and you can
mm,
run through, for example, what happens if Sterling blanks on 17 or 18 or 19
yeah,
or 20 or 21 basically,
yeah,
and then just see what is my worst sort of situation, I suppose, with Sterling. What is the worst suspension that I can take, and then compare that to, for example, your non-Sterling transfer, and that's probably the best way to do it, as opposed to, for example, looking at the very, very aggressive decay that is sort of put over Sterling, which sort of just, you know, disintegrates his value as a pick, because it doesn't
yeah,
make any sense. And a lot of people, for example, holding Bruno Fernandes will feel the opposite side of that too, because you're looking at a week like this week where, when he's playing and he's playing 92 minutes, he's basically the third captaincy option this week. Whereas if you
mm,
looked into his future game weeks, I mean, he's basically irrelevant. So yeah, I think that's a healthy exercise, and just means, adjust your minutes as you see fit. And I think it's totally fine to sort of override the decay. Just make sure you understand like what's your worst case scenario when I don't know, Sterling, let's say for example, misses that Burnley fixture, which probably would be the worst, right? Um,
exactly. Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, Sheffield United fixture, but yeah. And then in terms of, let's say, just the other picks, I think we talked about Gordon previously because we were discussing differences between review and market. Um, And I've sort of expounded on Gordon plenty on the pod. I don't think people need to hear more about that. But Foden's an interesting one where, ultimately we really do not expect double game week 20 to happen. And I think there's only a very, very small subset of managers who are looking at an exercise like 3-hit 18. But let's say you only own Haaland, it could make sense to go into Foden this week and still look at him as the pick that probably, yes, of course, has a guarantee of a blank, but also has potentially great EV, right? Someone who could be
Yeah.
75 minutes for the next two fixtures, which are actually two guaranteed fixtures. Whereas when you compare it to, let's say, Sterling, his situation obviously is such that Everton away is a very bad fixture in context. And then, of course, that Sheffield United fixture almost makes up for it. But Foden has basically two great games, and you're guaranteed actually to sell Foden, which is something that I don't like about going to Foden. When I was running solves, I'm also not in a necessary luxury situation. I've sort of found myself, because I've been forcing some transfers, which actually has helped me. For example, like Dubravka, since I own Areola, where ultimately I don't have the luxury to go into Foden, then suddenly move Foden to Douglas Luiz. And if I did, I feel like that would be way too intricate of a plan as it stands anyway. So that's for me the cause for concern with Foden as a pick, and probably why I would sidestep him. But I completely understand if you're someone who also looks very, very short term, and that's totally fine sometimes because you're grabbing immediate EV with Foden in this instance, that it would make sense because unfortunately, of course, Chelsea have a bad game. Newcastle have a bad game as well. So I think there's two sides to the argument, but personally, I would still take a little bit more of maybe a medium term approach, and I'd probably pick one of, let's say, Gordon or Sterling, and Palmer would be my first priority option
Yeah,
as
of
well.
course.
That's sort of
Of
the
course.
default.
Yeah.
That's why probably we haven't even talked about him, because that is such
Yeah.
an obvious transfer for people who
Yeah.
don't have Palmer. And then Huang, I think that's also another situation where not only are you dealing with 4 yellow cards, which means maybe some additional uncertainties, but you are also bringing in an Asian Cup player, and
Yeah.
that makes it
Yeah.
quite tough. I feel like last week, obviously with the additional free transfer from the previous week, and given the fact that you also played an amazing game versus Burnley at home, Huang was an amazing pick. I feel like we've probably just about
Mm.
missed the boat on Huang,
Mm.
and I think it's probably going to be someone that you should ignore if you didn't go Huang already. So those are my thoughts on the midfielders.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next topic is actually the last topic, but I don't know if you have any maybe other thoughts that you want to chime in with before we talk captaincy.
So the only thing I remembered to talk about with respect to Foden was, if you are someone who looks at, let's say, tail end of outcome distribution or expected value distribution, I would say that the Luton game, assuming that he starts and plays, let's say, between 70 to 80 minutes or
Yeah.
even higher, maybe because of a lack of replacements, I guess. If you are someone who wants to look at that, I think that that game alone, as you said, could be enough to justify getting Foden, because I have recommended someone to buy Foden instead of Sterling, but because of their team's situation was very specific. But in general, I think the big reason why review wants you to sell Foden is because, firstly, you have Holland on the bench who is 14 million, so your team in game week 18 is going to be weak as it is. And on top of that, if you want to bench someone else who is 7.5 million, essentially one fifth, more than one fifth of your team value will be on the bench in that week,
Mm-hmm.
and that is pretty bad,
Yeah.
especially with the fact that Liverpool play Chelsea. Liverpool play Arsenal, so defenses from both those teams have pretty suboptimal expected value. So there's not even a case of, let's say, I'll cover midfielder with someone like Simicas or something like that. It's going to be very tricky to navigate that week if you have 21.5 million from two players, by the way, and there are two more slots. Let's say you stick Areola and 4 million, or let's say Archer on the bench as well. It's going to be pretty stacked. Your bench is like almost one third of your team value. So I think that is a big reason why review would want you to go immediately out of Foden. But the fact that it is still one of the top lines suggests how devastatingly good it could be as an outcome for you. But it is definitely a risk, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, so let's quickly finalize with captaincy, but then we'll jump on to viewer questions. And honestly, I
Yeah.
appreciate a lot of you guys for being on. I think we
Yeah.
probably hit
Absolutely. Yeah.
our concurrent viewer sort of peak in the FPL podcast history here for FPL Script. So thank you guys so much. But yeah, we'll tune into your questions in a moment. In terms of captaincy, though, I've put Haaland and Salah, although as I actually sort of intonated earlier, Fernandes is probably the third best captaincy option. You may even see Son, I guess, Son starting potentially as a comparable option, but I think there's obviously a lot of risk to that. Fernandes probably clearly third anyways because it's Bournemouth at home. But Haaland way clear of Salah. But not everyone owns Haaland, as we know, and it's probably going to be one of those standard Salah captaincies for people who are on no Haaland.
Yeah, and I actually want to allude back to the part of the pod where you mentioned that no Hollanders, no Salah. People have kind of won out in the past couple of
They
weeks.
have.
And the big reason is exactly this. The weeks where you expected, let's say, at least one return from both of these, like last week, both of them blanking was pretty bad. Even though for us, it's better that Holland blanked because of the effective ownership, but still to win out against people who did not have Holland, it should have been like we at least wanted one return from him. That could have at least done some damage, but the fact that both of them blanked was just horrible, I think, for that. And consequently, this week, a lot of those players who did not have Holland are now bringing him in at the expense of Salah. So looking at what has happened in the past couple of weeks, I fully expect Salah to blank now, with the fact that those without Holland have now shifted from no Holland to Holland. But 100% going to captain Holland. There is no alternative this week. No one is even close this week. And unlike the narrative being purported online, he will start and he will play unless we hear about some random injury before the deadline.
Yeah, where are you getting those sources from? Is it Mr. Andy Martin?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's one of those. Yeah.
Nah, I kid. But I mean, I think ultimately when you look at maybe even evaluating how things have gone down, it's also been Trent who's absolutely destroyed the field, in my opinion.
Yes. Last 2 weeks. Yeah.
And then in our case, obviously, since we do own Holland, it would have been nice that he actually did well on one of his captaincy weeks. Whereas, for example, when I even look back at Salah, for example, there were plenty of captaincies he absolutely smashed when it was very clear that he was the dominant EV captain. So yeah, as it turns out, obviously it's not been great. We obviously have benefited from just, for example, owning Holland when he was sub 100, such as, for example, in the United game. I think that was a good example. But still not enough, for example, to make up for the fact that Trent has been disgusting. Which is fully deserved. And honestly, when I'm looking at that Crystal Palace versus Liverpool fixture, I would be shocked if Trent didn't drop something like another 12-pointer. And obviously this does make sense because the expected value for Trent's probably something like 5 for this game. But even if you look at Trent's, for example, sea of fixtures up until, let's say, even during the AFCON period, this is actually his best game from a clean sheet point of view as well. So this is huge. And even though I own Simicast and that might soften the blow, that could hurt a lot because Trent's, attacking output is obviously tangible compared to, let's say, Simicast. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Shall we move on quickly to some viewer questions as well? Thank you guys.
Yeah, we can.
All right. So I'm starting from the top. Obviously, hello, Jack. Hope you're doing well. Ismail says he's got in Foden for Mbumo, applying to wildcard 19. And see, obviously, this is one of the things that we didn't talk about.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, in such a position, I think you're in a luxury spot, basically. Some people have been talking about wildcarding on 20 instead, though. I haven't looked too deeply into, let's say, differences between 19 and 20, but I wonder if you've paid any attention to that yourself.
No, I haven't run solves myself, but I'm glad you brought it up because I've been looking at people posting about expected value from, let's say, wildcard 17, 18, 19, and 20.
Right.
And looks like for most of the people that I've seen, wildcard 19 is the one with the lowest expected value out of all of them. Now that the double game week has such a low probability of happening, almost 0, but I'm just going to say it's slightly like above non-zero right now, but it should be 0 soon enough. So if that's the case, then why not hold till 20? I guess the only thing is the quick turnarounds means that you just need to be aware of the deadlines. I think that's the only thing that is potentially going to catch people out. But other than that, I think Game Week 20 is perfectly fine, given the fact that you are not going to use your triple captaincy chip in that week. Because initially, when we were talking about not wildcard, double game week 20. A lot of people wanted to wildcard in that week, but the only reason they weren't going to do that is because they wanted to triple captain Holland in that week. But now that the double game week is not happening, I think it's perfectly valid to do that. To do that, and also you can take more risks. I guess one more week's worth of risks till you can actually wildcard. So I guess that works out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
The next question is by Freddy. Have Ariola and Strakosha. Should I do a -4 for Dubravka? I mean, I don't like -4s, but if you don't have a goalkeeper, yes. But how much EV does Dubravka have? Do you remember
Like
by any chance?
3.3 off the top of my head. Yeah, something like that. I
Yeah,
think it's worth it though.
it's still worth it.
Yeah, I think
It's
it's
still
worth it.
worth
I
it.
think it's worth
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
is. But barely, I would say.
Yeah.
Barely. Yeah.
It's just one of those where I feel like obviously, that net loss is going to be, on paper 0.7, but I think especially if Areola is out for an undisclosed amount of time and it seems like, for example, just reading Moyes' comments that it seemed like a small scale injury, but also that they're not exactly sure how severe it could be, which is always a very, very annoying situation, just reminding myself of Botman and that sort of situation. So yeah, that to me just makes me feel I don't really mind taking that net 0.7 on the off chance that it could actually work out. And if it doesn't work out, at least you have a Newcastle goalkeeper who then has three great fixtures in a row, and you can use your free transfers to sort out the abundance of other issues that will probably prop up within our teams anyways. So I don't think it's the worst thing. Dr. FPL, not even gonna give the just
No,
any
don't
sort
read
of
it out.
respect
Yeah.
to that comment
Yeah.
from potentially honestly the grassiest quote unquote analytics
Yes.
manager that I know.
Oh yeah. For
But
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then Lars says James in December. I completely
Yeah.
concur with
Exactly.
you. It is a bit of a
Yeah.
joke to expect
Yeah.
something crazy from James, right? Like he's not going to bring the greatness. I remember, for example, FPL Marchin on Twitter, he shows the FPL James roulette. At this point, honestly, I think only one of those 20 options should really be a whole. And
Yes.
yeah, you're expecting, 4s, 0s, 1s, 2s. That's what James really should be bringing right now. Just because you can't be sure. And yeah.
Yeah. Dr. FPL says Porro XGI per 90 higher than Martinelli this season. Yeah, fair. He has been brilliant and could not recommend him enough.
Yeah, I think
So
that's actually
next
a
is
credit to Porro rather than actually, a huge slight on Martinelli. Just because, for example, if you look at some of the other Arsenal picks, their non-penalty XGI has also been, equally subpar. So it's been a huge drop off for the Arsenal attack altogether.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
Bar Saka actually, who has really improved in terms of expected assists. But yeah.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. So Joey Nicap says, what do you think are fair minutes for Ake and Grealish this game week? Review has them at 58 and 60 currently. So first of all, let's see if we can conjure up Luke again, like we did in the last stream. But if he doesn't show up, Fran, I'm going to defer to you. What do you think?
I think 90 for Ake and at least like 78 for Grealish. Because it doesn't seem like Doku's back, right? So I'm struggling to see how Grealish with an extra game's rest is going to play anything less than 80 minutes. I might be wrong. He might absolutely stink it up, but I think that's a fair expectation.
Yeah, it is actually. Why Ake 90 though? That's kind of interesting.
I'm just thinking, like someone who, counteracts the set piece threat.
Because,
yeah, exactly. And he was
okay.
also benched in the previous game. If Pep wants to change his team around, that would be one of the changes, I presume. Guppy says, is Leon Bailey essential? I mean, absolutely not. I think my concern with Leon Bailey is obviously, the good game really starts when Gameweek 18. Obviously, he scored for City, but that doesn't really mean anything in terms of we shouldn't expect for players to do, consistently well in tougher fixtures than easier fixtures. So my concern really is, let's say, maybe when Gameweek 18 rolls around, you can have Diaby, for example, taking some more minutes in the team. Although it seems very clear that Bailey will start versus Arsenal, from what Unai Emery said. So that's a nice position where I would say just assess his minutes, right? And then by game week 18, if you really can't stand the idea of bringing Douglas Luiz into your team or for whatever reason, you can on 18 instead find Bailey as a potential option, knowing that he is obviously a huge risk as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The next question is by Hassan, who says, will Stones play tomorrow? I think he should. There is no reason for him to not play.
But are you not concerned about just playing a back-to-back coming from an injury, right? Because the first game
So
was Aston Villa.
fair. So I'm not going to say his X-Means are anywhere close to someone like Ake,
Hmm.
but from what I've read, the only way that Walker could get benched, because I think a fair few people are expecting Walker to be benched, is
Yep.
for John Stones,
Yes.
because they're expecting a backline of Jones, Diaz, Akanji, and Ake,
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
So if that is going to happen, I guess yes, but also we haven't had. First of all, as Fran said, he's just coming back from an injury, and from an injury which uh, he got injured in the midst of a season while coming back from injury.
Yeah.
So he does. I mean, I'm sure they're going to. I mean, it's Pep though, so because the way De Bruyne was treated, I don't know, but I hope they're more careful with him. So I wouldn't put him his X means. Let's say it's so tricky with these players because putting it at 60 is not going to give you the answer you want. But if you want to look at it long term, if you feel like he's going to play more games than uh, he's going to play more games than not, then I guess you can buy him.
Yeah, that's fair. Next question is from Lars. Question is Salah plus Darwin to Holland plus Bowen. I don't think that makes any sense personally for a -4.
Mm,
Just because first of all, I mean this might be the one podcast which Bowen doesn't really, rate extremely highly on. But secondly, I think the big thing here is I'm expecting a lot of minutes for Darwin, which anytime you can get great amount of minutes from Darwin, plus actually Salah has, is still a reasonably decent captaincy option. When you take into account the -4, I just don't think it's particularly close. Bowen's fixture as well as Fulham away, that's not particularly great as well. So in that context, yeah, I just think, of course, it's nice to get the Haaland captaincy in, but I feel like yeah, the actual net trade here feels a bit worse. For example, if you were, let's say, taking out, I don't know, Mbumo somehow out of this equation, then I'd be a bit happier with a -4 in
mm,
such an instance. But because Darwin is actually such a big contributor, and I think he's already better than Bowen,
yeah.
that sort of breaks it for me.
Yeah, and both of them should have 80 plus experience anyway for this game. Not as it's not as if you expect Darwin to be benched, and because both of them are going to play, just I would just captain Salah and look at Holland after the blank, I guess now because the best fixture is Luton, so you can probably avoid till Gameweek 19. But yeah, uh, Mr. Blanky says play Dubravka or John. Oh, sorry, wait. Hunt says should I play White or Trippier? I'm going to say Trippier just because
Yeah,
we know his minutes, we don't know White's minutes, so I don't think there's any debate there.
yeah. Plus the attacking threat's just huge
Yeah,
gulf,
of course.
anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Mr. Blanky says play Dubravka or Johnston. I'd definitely play Dubravka.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we are going to preface all of these questions by saying our first instinct is obviously to check expected value, and what we are telling you guys is essentially based off our thoughts and expected value combined.
Yep.
So I would look at expected value just to make sure, but I guess most of the answers that we've given right now should align with the expected values. Yeah, the next question is by Big Slick. No, Salah is actually a good shout with Mitchell out. Fair, but I don't think anyone comes close to Holland this week. Even if you consider any sort of matchups, which I don't put a lot of weightage in anyway. You want to take the next one?
Yeah. Next question is Harry Denby's question, which is recommending free hit this game week. Absolutely not. I think yeah, you can probably look at this game week as we all have some issues within our team, but I think these are all issues that you need to solve, right? For example, if Mbumo's out for weeks and you have him, you got to transfer him out. If let's say Son is out, which you have no certainty of, I mean, he's one of the actual big guns in this week that you'd like to target. The only team that you could possibly target really that have a good fixture that don't have good fixtures after this is a team like United, maybe even Wolves, for example, or Huang, given that you'd be absolutely certain he'd play. But no, there's really no value in free hitting here. It doesn't make sense. So I would save it for a better time later in the season.
Fair. Also, we have conjured Luke up again. So, hi, Luke. If you want to give us your insights into Stones, Ake, and Grealish, that would be much appreciated. And by the time we'll keep reading more questions. So, Joey Kneecaps is 17 and 20 clear front runner on wildcard now. Yeah, fair. That's what probably we surmised. Next one. So Lars says Salah was really anonymous versus Sheffield, not really himself at all.
I
It
think that's
happens.
I
I
think
mean,
that's fair, but
yeah,
everyone has a bad
yeah,
game here and there.
exactly. It's variance.
Um,
That's variance. Jack says Martinelli has been a shadow of his former self. Fair. I also think it's something to do with him coming back from injury because it took him a couple of games to really get back up to speed. I don't know if it has anything to do with that, but uh, I think I trust more.
I
I
mean,
have more trust
he's
in,
also
let's
hit the
say,
post a lot of times this season.
yes. Yeah, and also I trust more of his like historical underlines because we do have a lot of data to back Martinelli. So
Yeah.
I would definitely consider that. But fair, I mean, he's not a legitimate FPL option anyway for most people, except for MD rank 2 from last season, I guess.
Right. Maybe we quickly speed through some questions. Like we can go
Yeah.
with one answer each.
Yeah.
So next question is from Mackenzie Hunt. Trippier worth buying this week? I don't think so. It's a very bad game versus Tottenham. It's an away fixture. And who knows? I mean, he could get rested. I think that's probably something that we really shouldn't expect. I'm talking more 5 to 10% chances here, but who knows? Maybe he does deserve a rest ahead of that Champions League fixture. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't buy him on an away fixture. If anything, I'd stretch as much as possible to go into Trent if you really wanted an attacking fullback this week that has a good fixture in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Hassan says, next session is sorry, will Allison start? I think it's touch and go from what I've read. I
Yeah,
don't think it's a
he's been in
guarantee,
training,
but
but that's it. That's
he
all
is
we
in
know.
training. But
Yeah,
yeah, that doesn't mean anything. So I would guess that he definitely should start the United game.
yeah.
But I I would say it's 50-50 because I have to if I were forced to give a percentage, but uh really up in the air, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this comes down to whether it's a risk, from the medical team really at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
if anything, this is probably one of your best games where you're probably okay with Kelleher playing and calling it a day there with Allison. As far as other questions, playing Udogi or Saliba slash Gabriel, I would play probably Gabriel. Not too fond, for example, of we talked about how Udogi there's a huge disparity between him and Porro, so you're getting less of that attacking upside. The Tottenham team's still pretty poor from a defensive point of view. I'd probably actually just go with Gabriel, who intuitively has slightly higher goal threat. Although actually this season I've looked at expected goals, you can see it as well. I mean, last season there was a point in time where Saliba was not attacking corners. Now he is, and there's we might obviously need more years of data to find out, but yeah, I'd probably trust Gabriel being the larger set piece threat. Just go with Gabriel. Because I'm not actually well, I mean, if I had to predict the result, I'd say Aston Villa probably will score. So all the sort of bonus thresholds that Saliba sort of contains would probably be taken away in that instance. So just kind of going to the worst case, I think Gabriel's quite nice.
Yeah, I would go with the same. Mackenzie Hunt says thoughts on Garnacho or McTominay as a cheap option. Look, if you really have to go there, it's so difficult because and I've spoken with Fran about this as well.
Yeah,
Ten Hag's team selections this season have entirely been based on quote unquote form,
yeah,
whatever you want to call it as. And if Garnacho has a bad game, because right now Rashford is on the bench, that's going to be an easy swap to get Rashford back onto the left wing. And the other position I think is a little bit more secure because first of all we play three in midfield, so Bruno is obviously nailed. The other one is let's say between Amrabat and Kobe Mainu. So the third spot is left between right now Mount is still not completely fit, so it is between Mount, Ericsson when he comes back, and McTominay. And right now with the number of goals he's been scoring, and it's like every time he scores, he goes on a barren run where it's like he comes back onto the edge of let's say people are expecting him to be left out, and then he scores again. So
mm,
it's like that is a cycle that somehow keeps happening. So I would say that McTominay has far better X-Mins
yeah.
than Garnacho, and you could play around with those minutes on the review and see which option comes up. But I would probably go for McTominay. Ideally, I would go for none of them. But if you were to ask me one out of those, I would say McTominay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is actually a very interesting topic, and we did say fast answers, but I do want to touch on this because I've been looking into some of these picks, and I can understand. So, for example, MD1, for example, he's gone for Lo Celso at that sort of price point, and I think it's worth bringing Lo Celso into the discussion as well. He was
Wait, he
subbed
has?
off. Yeah, he
He
has.
actually did? I
He
thought he was
he's brought in
joking.
he's brought in Lo Celso. He's brought in Lo Celso so that obviously he can enable um, a move like Trippier on Game Week 17. But
Oh.
in that instance, right, Lo Celso got subbed off at 65 minutes, but I think you're looking at someone like Lo Celso who can maybe continue to start persistently. Because Madison also seems to be out until, let's say, February for now, so it's a good run of games to actually own Lo Celso over, in theory. But I think you can throw Lo Celso into that hat there. I think what's interesting with someone like McTominay is we have seen, of course, internationally ridiculous form, but actually underlying stats so far this season, like he reminds me a lot of Doucouré as well, where these are both players who are sort of playing a new role within their teams this season. Both their expected goals is something like 0.32, which is honestly absurdly high, right? For a box-to-box mid or a traditionally
Yeah.
box-to-box mid. And I think they're all interesting options. And so I think with McTominay, my concern is the fixtures are pretty awful for United after the Bournemouth game. So although it's nice to jump onto, let's say, McTominay, unless you are not going to be playing him at all for the foreseeable future, then I think that's the only concern that I have with McTominay in that sort of fixture run. Whereas with, let's say,
Mm.
Spurs, I think their fixtures right now are pretty good. So even though you're not maximizing, let's say, 90 minutes of the Celso, because I don't think that's an absolute guarantee at all, as I said, he's probably between 65 to 75 X-Mins. At least you're maybe playing against good fixtures and you're sort of gambling that way. But I think, we'll probably have to revisit in a few weeks' time what to do with players like Doucouré, who, for example, is very, very highly rated on market now, as it seems to be adjusting to his goal scoring spree and his underlying stats, and also McTominay as well. But yeah, I agree with you completely in terms of Garnacho and McTominay. I think Garnacho is definitely more of a risk, and McTominay less so.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
also just to add to that point, if they had better fixtures, I would at least consider it. But the fact
mm,
that their fixtures are bad as well
yeah,
means that there is absolutely no need to go for them. With the Lo Celso thing, I am a little bit surprised, but I once you explained to me the reasoning, I kind of get it because Spurs don't have terrible fixtures, especially compared to United.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I get the appeal of someone like Lo Celso compared to someone like McTominay because I would much rather trust in Spurs attack compared to United's attack right now. And okay, so we have one more question if you want to
Yeah,
end
I'll
on
take
that.
it.
Yeah,
So Isaac's question is, who's the best over the next 6 game weeks, Darwin or Watkins? I think 100% Watkins.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
way I would also answer that is, if you, let's say you own Darwin now, you move to Watkins on game week 18. If you own Watkins now, you don't
yeah,
even have to worry about Darwin. So I think that's really how you should play it. If you own both, however, just continue to own both really and enjoy it because you're probably on some sort of 3-4-3 structure. And I can see yourself probably owning all those picks, across the Asian Cup and AFCON.
yeah, absolutely. I think we'll take this one last question and then we can end the podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to pronounce this because it's gibberish. Start Archer ahead of Adingra. A lot of talk about Adingra rotation with Lalana coming back. So I've spoken to people that own Adingra and they desperately wanted him to be benched in game week 16, 15.
Yeah.
So the fact that he played the majority of the game, it does make me think he will be benched because he's been playing 90 minutes consistently for I think 6 games in a row now or something like that. So if there is a rest coming for Adingra, it is going to be this game. I'm not too certain it's going to come in this game, but I would say that his experience should definitely be lower than they have been for let's say the last 3 to 4 weeks. So with Archer, with new management, I think he has better X minutes. So expected value wise, I think the review will tell you to start Archer ahead of Adingra anyway, because review doesn't rate Adingra in the first place. I think it's a completely subjective call. I would go for Adingra just because of the fixture, but in the odd chance he starts, because I assume if he doesn't start, he'll probably come on as a sub anyway. So it's a difficult call. I have no trust in Sheffield United's attack, so probably I'm a little bit biased there. I would never go for Archer. I would go for Edinger, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
doing similar things where, I mean, just look at, for example, picking Darwin, for example, last week when I knew more than likely he would be subbed, things like that. That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So thank you everyone for watching. I think we hit 30 concurrent viewers at one point, so
Yeah.
really appreciate it. That's actually a record high for us. Thank you to everyone who's joined in, who's interacted in the chat, and anyone, of course, who's been listening to the podcast in general over the course of the season. We really appreciate the support. If you could like and subscribe, that would really help the sort of growth of the channel. And yeah, I think that's it from me signing off. Thank you guys so much once again.
Yeah. We'll see you next week. Bye.